Hey, what's the crack, and welcome to or back to the channel. Today's episode is a review of the Freewell Versatile Magnetic Variable VND. What Freewell have done is they've taken a traditional variable VND, which by the way is just two circular polarizers housed in one frame, and they've deconstructed it into its two core panes of glass. Additionally, they've provided you with a mist version of the kind of base end of that, and then a more dense version of the stacked end of it. And with these four panes of glass using that magnetic system, you can reconfigure them to suit your needs. Now, Freewell says they can be configured into 7 features, but I think really it's 8. Starting with the variable VND base filter, this will give you 1 stop of neutral density. When we stack this with the 2 to 5 stop pane of glass, this will give you a variable VND with a range of 2 to 5 stops. We swap that out for the 6 to 9 pane of glass, and this will now be a variable VND of 6 to 9 stops. And both of these have hard stops, which means you will avoid that dreaded X pattern that we get with traditional VNDs. We can repeat that over to get 3 more features when we swap out for the mist version of that base VND. So 1 stop, 2 to 5, and 6 to 9 stops of a mist variable VND. Then if we leave out any base filter and we take the 2 to 5 VND and flip it around, you will get a traditional circular polarizer, which naturally cuts about 1 stop of light. And then again, with no base filters, if we take the 6 to 9 pane of glass and flip that around, you will get a CPL that also has an ND32 built into it, so that will be 5 stops of light reduced. If you break that out into individual stops of light, that is a total of 20 functions for the price of $399. The kit also comes with this threaded filter to magnet adapter, which you can use to make any threaded lens work with this magnetic system. You will also get this beautiful filter pouch with a carabiner so that you can hang it off of a belt loop for easy access. And lastly, you will get a set of instructions and a microfiber cloth. I have the 82mm kit, but these also come in a 58, 62, 67, 72, 77, and 95mm kits. For those of you who are new to filtration, what do these filters do? Starting with neutral density, these cut the amount of light going through your lens and hitting your camera's sensor. The biggest benefit of this is being able to get a correct exposure whilst maintaining your desired camera settings, such as aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. Circular polarizers cut only polarized light. Polarized light is responsible for things like glare and reflections on surfaces, so we can use these to cut through that glare and reflections to better see through those surfaces. And then also there can be a lot of polarized light in the sky depending on what direction your camera is pointed. So we can use this to cut that polarized light, which will result in a deeper, richer, bluer sky. And lastly, the mist filter. Now, the generic term for these types of filters is diffusion filters. The key attributes of diffusion filters is 1, a blooming of the highlights, 2, a reduction in contrast by ever so slightly lifting our black point or raising our shadows. And then lastly, a slight reduction in softness. The mist filter in this kit is a strength of 1/8. So basically its effect is apparent in the image, but it's not overpowering the image either. So I ran some basic tests to assess the performance of these filters. So let's go through the results, starting with color cast. Here is our control image with no filtration. When we add the variable VND base filter, we can see that there is a bit of warmth being added. When we stack on the 2 to 5 variable VND, we get a bit more warmth again, but that remains consistent throughout its range. When we swap out for the 6 to 9 stop, we have warmth added relative to the control and relative to the base filter, but it's not as warm as the 2 to 5 stop. And again, this stays consistent throughout its range. We see the exact same pattern when we have the mist variable VND base filter. And the circular polarizers follow the same pattern. To give these color shifts some sort of a practical context, I did a quick white balance dropper adjustment to all of the images in DaVinci Resolve, and I compiled a spreadsheet with the results, so feel free to pause the video and have a look at that. Now, by no means is this a scientifically accurate test, but it does give you a practical indication of the corrections that you can expect to make in post-production when using these filters. When it came to sharpness, these filters have performed brilliantly across the board. At standard viewing conditions, I cannot detect any perceivable loss of sharpness, except for when using the mist diffusion filters, which is to be expected. When we zoom into 400%, we can detect a minor bit of detail loss when adding the base variable ND filter. When we stack the 2 to 5 stop variable ND piece of glass, we can detect another minor loss of sharpness, and that remains consistent throughout its range. When we swap out then for the 6 to 9 stop pane of glass, we can see another tiny loss in detail, which again remains consistent throughout its range. But I have to say, I'm not even sure if these minor detail losses are going to transmit to you after YouTube's compression. When we use the mist base filter, we see the exact same pattern emerge, but everything is just a touch softer again, but that is expected again with diffusion filters. Then when it came to the 2 strengths of circular polarizer filters, even at 400%, I couldn't personally perceive any noticeable detail loss. When it came to testing for vignetting with these filters, I was unable to conduct a true, fair, controlled test with the equipment that I have because of the sheer amount of light output one needs to test 9 stops of density. In short, our control image is contaminated with a vignette due to how the light naturally falls off on this flat surface. Because of this, all we should take away from this test is the pattern of vignetting being added by these filters and not the true severity of that vignette. For that, we'll assess later on in some real world testing. When we add the base variable ND filter, we cannot detect any real additional vignetting being added to the image. When we stack on the 2 to 5 stop variable ND, at 2 stops, we do see some additional vignetting being added. And this gets progressively worse as we circle through to the 5th stop. When we swap out for 6 to 9 stops, at 6 stops, the additional vignetting isn't as bad as the 2 to 5 stop at 5 stops. But as we rotate through the variable ND down to 9 stops, this also gets progressively worse, where we see the filters performing at their worst. Again, this is not to be used to assess the severity of the vignetting. Having used these filters on a couple of shoots and just out and about shooting with my camera, here is what I've learned. When shooting in a controlled lighting environment, I can detect the color shifts that is present with these filters, but it's so minor that it can quickly and easily be corrected with a simple white balance adjustment. And this of course can be done in camera or in post-production. Then when it came to shooting outside, I found personally that changing lighting conditions due to weather caused way more fluctuation to my white balance than the filters ever did. When it came to sharpness, it is very easy to nitpick when zoomed in on a focused chart. In my opinion, the reality of shooting with these filters results in a stellar performance for sharpness across the board. Trying to test for vignetting in the real world resulted in the following. I stopped my lens down to f5.6 to ensure that it wasn't contributing any vignetting. I pointed my camera at this wall of an abbey. I went straight to 9 full stops of ND, as we know this is the worst vignetting that we can expect. To get an exposure, I had to raise my camera up to its 2nd base ISO of 3200. I do notice a vignette being added to the image, but for me personally, by no means is it strong or aggressive. Even when the camera is moving, it's still not distracting me or drawing my eye. And let's be real, how many of you honestly noticed vignetting on initial viewing of this video's opening sequence? To conclude this review, for me personally, with the exception of internal NDs, these filters have been the most practical and convenient system that I have ever used. The feature to performance to cost ratio of this set of filters is pretty much unparalleled. At the time of making this video, with the current state of the market and competition, to get small improvements to color or vignetting performance, you are going to have to pay significantly more, and you will also lose that magnetic functionality. Going forward, this is my primary set of filters for my day-to-day videography run and gun work. And that is because of their convenience and the fact that they perform better in every category than my current set of filters, with exception to my quarter Tiffin Black Pro Mist. Anyway, that is all I have for today's review. I do of course hope that you found it helpful, and if you did, please do consider giving the video a thumbs up, as well as subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. Have a good one, and I'll see you in the next video. We came to fight.